Welcome to the Disruptors Creed podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Zeman, and I am shocked you are here. In this weekly podcast, I delve into the essence of being a disruptor, an individual who dares to view the world through a lens of possibility rather than limitation. I am solo today because I am in the great state of Idaho, delivering a keynote to the Human Resources Association of Treasure Valley. I just got done. 500 people in the audience, and it was electric. Last week, we talked about communication and how to get past small talk and delve into deeper conversation to build more substantial relationships. So last night I got invited to the board dinner for this organization, and they're the ones who brought me in to speak. So it was just a bunch of us sitting at a table, and I thought I would test it out. Normally I would, just make small talk, and I was sitting around 4 women, and we were conversing through appetizers and dinner. And I wanted to take the conversation to another level, so I decided to try and do it. It is absolutely remarkable when you ask the right questions. We started talking about our kids, and one of them said that her son was having a challenge. Another said her daughter was having a challenge. She didn't get accepted into a PhD program. And the list goes on. And so, I said, what is the thing that you're most afraid about for your kids today? And boy, did that open up some really vulnerable conversation. One woman said that her kids, 2 of her kids, are in the LGBTQ community, and she's terrified for them. And it was a moment of vulnerability, and I felt how fearful she was. Another woman started talking about the dynamics of her daughter's graduation and how her ex-husband's family had to go there and they don't get along. And, so I just asked some probing questions about, what was that like? Was there drama? Were you able to get through it? And I got the backstory, and I'll probably never see these women again in my life. I hope I do, because they were pretty cool. But it just made the dinner so much less of getting through small talk, knowing that I'm coming in and leaving. But I don't know. I just felt like in that 2-hour dinner, I got to know so much about people's triumphs and fears. So it was pretty cool. But this week is a little different. It is not about communication in our personal lives. It is about communication in the workplace. And, the way that I'm teeing this up is if your communication at work feels more like a hostage negotiation than a team huddle, then yeah, it's time for a reset. So we're going to move beyond small talk and tackle how real leaders actually create space for truth telling, for dissent, for bold ideas. And here's the fact is that disruption doesn't happen in echo chambers. So this doesn't just apply to casual conversations or airplane chats. It's just as critical in leadership. In fact, I posit that communication is everything in leadership, because leadership isn't just about being polite. It's about building trust. That's how you earn the trust of your people to lead the organization. It's about creating a kind of culture where people feel safe to speak up, and they feel even safer to speak out in dissent. There are ways to empower dissent without losing control. When people stop talking, I call it the dog that doesn't bark. But, connection isn't about warm fuzzies. It's about building a culture where people feel safe to disagree. And that is the key. And I'm not talking about the meeting after the meeting. I'm not talking about the passive aggressive disagreement behind closed doors or around the water cooler. I'm talking about real time, face to face, heart pounding truth. Here is the brutal truth about leadership and why leadership is not for the faint of heart, because 50% of the people will love what you do, and the other 50% will think you're a lunatic. That's the job that you signed up for. Yeah. If you can't take it, then you have no business being a leader. You're not there to win popularity contests. You're there to create an environment where even your harshest critic feels safe enough to speak. That is a tough culture to cultivate. But if you want people to challenge your thinking, and you should want that. In fact, pause here because you say you want that. As a leader, if you've ever said the words, I have an open door policy, come on in anytime, people will pay very close attention to how you respond when they actually do walk into your office. And I have found so many people who have said, oh yeah, I tried that open door policy and I got punished for it. So they quickly will stop coming into your office. One of the biggest lessons I learned about leadership, and I'm sad to say, a lot of the lessons that I have learned about leadership are what not to do based on what I've seen others do. And this particular instance that I can think of has to do with it was a staff meeting, full staff meeting. I was a sergeant or a lieutenant. I can't recall. I remember the players, but I don't remember my rank. And we were talking about something operationally, or, something that we're going to do, a plan that was put in place. And I simply asked a question of the lieutenant who was putting these plans together. It wasn't snarky. It wasn't disrespectful. It was just, hey, explain to me why we're going to do that. And that person accused me of ambushing him during the meeting, all because I asked a question. That word is seriously, he used that word ambush. And that told me everything I needed to know about the culture I was operating in as it pertains to him. Disagreement wasn't just unwelcome, it was dangerous. And you guys, that's where innovation goes to die. You have to be able, as a leader, to be able to answer the question of the why behind the do. If you call that an ambush when someone says, hey, why are we doing this? Instead of just explaining the why behind the do, once again, if your ego gets bruised, then you have no business being a leader, because disruption doesn't come wrapped in compliments. And I think that we need to learn a new language in our organizations. All you have to do to invite dissent, or critical thinking, or even more ideas, is to say words like this. Hey, I may be off on this one. Tell me what you think. Here's our idea, what we want to implement. What am I missing here? Or simply the words, hey, push back if this feels off to you. A thing that I said that I actually learned from my daughter, who's in the Air Force, is throw spears at this idea. What spears can you throw at this? What are my blind spots? You can also say things like, here's my idea, convince me otherwise. That is not weak leadership. That is secure leadership. That is real leadership. There's that term, psychological safety, that was coined by Harvard professor Amy Edmondson. And that may sound touchy-feely, but that is the number one predictor of high-performing teams. When people don't fear humiliation or punishment for speaking out, they get curious. They get creative. They speak out not to sabotage, but to serve, to understand why we're doing this so that they can help move the ball down the field as well. Listen, your job is not to have all the answers. No one expects you to have all the answers. Instead, your job is to build a structure where others feel free to solve the problem without you hovering over them like a vulture. Autonomy doesn't mean chaos. I think that there's this notion that if I give people, the reins, then, what do they say? If I let the inmates run the asylum, things are going to run amok around here. Jesus, that to me also tells me everything I need to know about you as a leader. Autonomy doesn't mean chaos. It means trust with direction. It means saying, hey, here's the outcome that I need. Get us there. Get us there your way. Here is the mission of this organization. Help us get there. Here is an idea for this project. Uh, and when you say that to people and you say, take us there, when people know that they have the room to think independently, they don't just complete tasks, they actually create solutions. And micromanagement is fear dressed up as control. It just simply means you're insecure. You're scared to relinquish control. It's an ego problem. It's an insecurity problem. And it always ends the same way. Burnout, turnover. People are going to want to leave or get away from you. So they'll go to another division, unit, or they may just leave your organization in general. It causes apathy. It causes people to check out. And that, my friends, is the biggest disease that we have to fight in our organizations. When no one cares anymore to speak up about their thoughts, their feelings, their ideas, even their criticisms. If they can't do that, then you have lost them. And I'm not suggesting that you have to get buy-in on everything. As the chief, sometimes decisions are made what I called in a committee of one, where I got all of the feedback that I needed to get from the people who needed to give it, maybe even reached out to people who wouldn't normally be at the table, and then made my decision. So you don't have to fall into a consensus addiction where everyone needs to fall into this, yes, we all agree. Not every decision needs a think tank and a PowerPoint. So leadership is knowing when to include and then also when to be decisive. So the key here is to build a culture where it's safe to speak up. And you as a leader are responsible for building that culture. Culture isn't defined by mission statements or murals or vision statements. Just ask your people, hey, what's our mission statement? A lot of them don't know, or they don't feel an emotional tie to it. But culture is actually how it feels to walk into work, how to walk into a meeting, how to pitch an idea and say the words, hey, I see it a little differently here, guys. There is so much power in that. And if your people don't feel safe, they'll fake it. I've seen that too. I have been that person. After I was told that I ambushed that leader, you can bet that I never spoke up again. I just nodded and smiled and said all the right things. And then privately, completely disagreed with that decision. And that's what your people will do as well. They'll go through all of the motions and then they will sometimes sabotage, work against you. Or worse, as I said, they'll go quiet. And when your team stops talking, that is not a sign of agreement, my friends. It is a warning sign of disengagement. People only speak up when they believe their voice matters and that it won't be used against them, that they won't be punished for it. So if you want brave ideas from your people, then you need to create brave spaces for them to speak up. Here are a couple simple ways to build it. Reward candor, not just compliance. Reward that person that says, hey, I kind of have a different perspective on this. Can I offer it to you? Or I have a different idea. Or I'm not so sure that's the outcome that you think is going to happen. And then ask more than you tell. Ask the questions. As I mentioned earlier, what am I missing here? And get uncomfortable with your ideas being challenged. They're not attacking you. They are simply challenging an idea. That is not your identity. It's just an idea, but it's going to feel uncomfortable at first, especially when you're excited about something that you want to implement and people say, hey, I don't think that's going to work, boss. Yeah, that's hard to hear. Or I think you're out of touch with the rank and file. That's hard to hear. But remember, silence, again, isn't agreement. It means they're exhausted. And when people stop fighting for change, it's because they've accepted that change is impossible. So what you need to do is create a space where truth tellers are respected instead of reprimanded. When you do that, you will unlock something powerful. Because when people feel safe, they get bold, they get weird, they get real. And that is where the most disruptive, the most brilliant, and the most culture shifting ideas are born. So ask yourself this: are you building a workplace where people are heard, or one where they are silenced with their smiles? Disruption doesn't happen in rooms full of yes men, yes women, or bobbleheads. It starts in rooms where dissent is not just allowed, it is expected and it is encouraged. And that is the room you were made to lead. Keep on disrupting, my fellow disruptors. Onward and upward.